Hello everybody, this is part one of what will probably be a two-part video on critical theory. Now, the text does not explicitly address the Frankfurt School, but I'm going to break these theorists into their components. The first body of critical theory that we need to look at, modern critical theory, are three gentlemen, Max Horkheimer, Theodor Adorno, and Herbert Marcuse. Okay? These three theorists came of age in Germany in the Weimar era, prior to the Nazis taking over in the mid-20th century, in the mid-20th century in 1932 in Frankfurt, Germany. With the rise of the Nazis, these three fled first to Switzerland and subsequently to the United States. Now, as a parenthetical comment, when we talk about critical here, critical has a negative connotation. Critical here means able to scrutinize social processes and think in a self-reflexive manner about your place in society. It does not mean, in the colloquial sense of the word, you're being negative or something. Sometimes they use terms like negate and critical, and they have different meanings than we would normally ascribe to them, largely because of their translation out of the German. At any rate, these three theorists were trying to make sense of the rise of the Nazis and the failure of Marx's economic revolution to take hold in a meaningful way. Their work variates or takes off from Marx. If you recall, Marx theorized that the workers would gain what he termed class consciousness. That's when workers collectively gain an awareness of their common interest and of their adversarial relation, if you remember, to owners or the bourgeoisie. But Horkheimer and his colleagues, Adorno and Marcuse, with a realization that the workers could be divided, misinformed, and manipulated, saw that, and these are Horkheimer's words, the situation of the proletariat is no guarantee of correct knowledge. This awareness, parenthetically, class consciousness, we're talking here, is prevented from becoming a social force, parenthetically, that is, from the workers collectively realizing that their lot in life is not good and banding together to revolt against the owners. So, Horkheimer and the Frankfurt School turned away from Marx's view of historical materialism. Recall from reading about Marx that he thought that the independent variable that drove all social change was the economy. Materialism here meaning how humans extract their material needs from the environment. Marx thought that the economic material model, remember here that materialism equals the economy of a particular era, occurred and was the determining force, the independent variable, if you're thinking in terms of methods, for all social change. When economic situations or material arrangements or how resources are allocated, these all mean the same thing here, became unequal, that is, when the material resources were unequally distributed in a particular historical era, then there would be some upheaval, a revolution. Now, without going into it too much, Marx was in direct conflict with Georg Hegel. Hegel, in opposition to Marx, thought that ideas or beliefs were the essence of reality. This essence lied not in material arrangements, but in structures of ideas. Consciousness becomes distorted. Individuals had to be able to negate or resist the idea that there was some objective truth out there. Because of this changing characteristic of domination, humans had lost their capacity to negate or critique the status quo. Thus, we are condemned, according to Horkheimer and his associates, to be manipulated by it. So the Frankfurt School was a critique of what we call 20th century. What does that mean? Well, for this group of theorists, spearheaded by Horkheimer, there was a distinction between different kinds of reason. We tend to think of reason, that's unreasonable, or you're reasonable. That's a perfectly reasonable thing, right? But if you think about the meaning of that word for a minute, it'll become clearer that we are unclear about exactly what that means. So we think of reason as a capacity to come to rational means and conclusions. Remember rationality from chapter 1. Horkheimer, though, made a distinction between subjective reason, the adequacy of a process. Subjective reason does not concern itself with whether or not the end or the result or effect of a process is good or it's just or ethical, or whether or not it results in the most good for the most people. This is coupled with technological rationality, a scientific approach to all human endeavor. Note that this is not explicitly anti-science. They were concerned with the outcomes of science. Science can be used to grow the highest yield of crops and feed the highest number of people, or it can be used to come up with the most effective way to mass murder the maximum number of people. Remember, these gentlemen were fleeing the Nazis, and so they were aware of the extermination camps in Germany. So technological rationality was dangerous in that it represented a view of the world characterized by conformity, efficiency, convenience, and profit. This extends to everything, not only production, but every part of culture, including entertainment, which we'll talk about in a moment. This technological rationality was contrasted with individualistic rationality. In effect, that is the Frankfurt School's answer or punchline to the concept of alienation that Marx and Weber talk about. Individualistic rationality is a critical attitude that derives freedom of action from unrestricted liberty of thought. The goal is to understand one's world, establish personal objectives, and achieve them through rational methods, ensuring self-realization. This is the opposite of Marx's alienation. Through this, the Frankfurt School theorists thought people would arrive at objective reason, or the most ethical, just, fair condition for both themselves and for their fellow humans. So this technological rationality, this belief in the status quo, comes via human expression. Here we bring Theodor Adorno into the mix. Technological rationality is taken for granted. The way that this plays out in modernity, not class exploitation a la Marx, is a primary mechanism for oppression in modern society. This ideology, according to Adorno, is disseminated in large measure through what Adorno terms the culture industry. All mass culture products, music, television, advertisements. Everything is standardized in what Adorno calls pseudo-individualization. We look like we're getting a choice, but we're not really. The music we listen is designed to sell advertising, as is television, our participation on social media, our consumption of news, movies, any number of ways that we are communicated with through art, entertainment, and increasingly news and information. So Adorno is an interesting fellow. I personally have been reading Adorno as both a professional musician and a sociologist. I've been reading Adorno on and off for years, about 20 or 30 years, before I came to kind of a distillation of his ideas. He talks about the culture industry and he talks about popular music a lot. But he fell afield when he tried to identify the kinds of music that are part of this culture industry. He incorrectly identifies, for example, jazz in the 1940s as popular music, when at the time it was emerging and transforming and becoming an African-American high art form, much as European classical music from 200 years or more prior had emerged from European folk music forms. So he was off base, right, in a manner. But his insight that music had been co-opted into means of cultural production to sell products and advertisements bears out reality. Under scrutiny, there are some parts of this idea that are true. Again, as a professional musician and a sociologist, I've been reading Adorno for about 20 years to try to see what's correct, what is irrelevant, and what we might use. That advertising is the tail that wags the dog doesn't just apply to popular music, though. But Adorno talks about music a lot. There are authentic musical forms that have come up from the folk, to use their terms, and they have been co-opted into advertising forms. Take hip-hop, for example. You see hip-hop music soundtracks advertising cake ads, right? Below, I'm going to provide at the end of this video a link to some other videos I think are interesting and might make. I'll provide a link, first of all, to Public Enemy's It Takes a Nation of Millions to Hold Us Back in the links below. See whether or not hip-hop has been co-opted. It went from an inherently political statement, drawing on the intellectual traditions of Malcolm X, for example, to a sort of extolling the virtues of parts of the capitalist experience. So I don't look like such an old man. Old people are always talking about how current music is bad, music was better when we were younger, etc. I'm also providing a couple of links from rather young YouTube. Will be from Thoughty2. He's a 22-year-old from Scotland. And then someone who did an actual scientific analysis of the content of popular music. What we find is that indeed there is some veracity in Adorno's assertion that popular music is not a means in and of itself. It's not there just for us to enjoy. It's there to program us to enjoy it. Okay? So basically, they've actually reduced this to a mathematical algorithm. Incidentally, since about 2000, one man, Max Martin, he's from Sweden, and he's not a very young person now. He's probably in his 40s. He's written every popular song, basically, since about 2000. He's written about 85% of the popular music we see, across Justin Bieber, Katy Perry, etc., etc. Just to underscore that this is nothing new, though, this technological rationality carried to its subjective reasoned extreme to modern popular music, I'm providing also a link to the top 30 songs of 1955. There's not much here to suggest that this era 2 years before my birth was some paragon of lost great popular music either. Although a recording of the same song by 3 artists is not necessarily likely today. Note that this is at the height of the anti-communist era, and that the airways, much like society in general, racially segregated. Out of these artists, we only have 2 artists of color on the list, out of the 30. So bad popular music is nothing new. We just have better mathematical formulas to create a product that will sell the optimum amount of advertising. Was Adorno correct in his assertion about popular music and popular culture, that it's designed just to make us numb, to sort of tranquilize us? You be the judge of that. But I think we can safely say that advertising dominates much of modern culture to the only end of perpetuating it. Thank you for watching.